What's the difference between me and you, me and you?
Welcome to the Difference is Black and White podcast. I'm DJ Bre.
I'm Chris.
And this is our special guest, Dr. Jasmine Scott Hawkins.
That's correct.
And yes, this is our mental health episode, so we brought on a specialist. So Jasmine, can you tell us about yourself?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Well, thank you guys for having me here this evening. So as I was introduced as, my name is Dr. Jasmine Scott Hawkins. So I am a psychiatrist. I specialize in child and adolescent psychiatry, and I work with adults as well.
Awesome. Kids and adults.
So can you tell us the difference between a psychiatrist and a psychologist?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's a point that gets very confusing for a lot of people. So psychology is kind of a route where you go to graduate school after attending college and you achieve what's called a PhD, a postdoctorate degree. And so or you can do a PsyD as well. And so depending on kind of which route you go down, you'll focus on providing like mental health services primarily through therapy, or some people will focus on more of like a research basis and kind of go through that and contribute to the body of literature kind of out there in the world. And so the path that I went, so I am a medical doctor. So for us, we do college and then we go to medical school. And so when you go to medical school, you're not really sure kind of what you're going to specialize in. So some people will do family medicine, or they'll do surgery or obstetrics and gynecology. And so I chose to specialize in psychiatry. And so I work with severely mentally ill patients, primarily with medication management. And then I do some therapy services as well.
Gotcha. And then there's also MFTs, which is what are those again?
So then there are therapists. So there's like marriage and family therapists, which are MFTs. There are social workers that will do therapy. So there's a lot of different disciplines within the field of mental health that can kind of provide services to people.
Gotcha. Nice. What inspired you to go into that?
Yeah, so that's a big question. So back when I was in college, I thought, I wanted to be a physician. I thought I wanted to do obstetrics and gynecology, actually, was what I wanted to do, and to work in women's health. And so I did college, and then I took a year off actually to do research and to kind of contribute to the literature for women's health. And so then I got off to medical school, still with that very much in mind. But when I hit my psychiatry rotation, I was really like blown away. It was very different than all the other rotations that we had to go through. So like with surgery or like family practice, because I felt like you could build this really deep-rooted connection with your patients that in other specialties, just the way it's set up, you're not really able to do that as much. So that really drew me in, that just like deep connection with patients. And then I was also very fascinated by the pathology and kind of the treatment and all of that.
Yeah.
So where did you do your training?
So I did college out at UCLA, go Bruins, and then I did some research over at Charles Drew University in conjunction with UCLA. Then I went out of state to Ohio to Wright State University, Boonshoff School of Medicine in Dayton, Ohio. And so I did a dual degree program there. So it was where you get your MD, your medical doctorate, and then I also got my master's in public health while I was out there. It's a long road. So then you go through this whole like match process that's kind of like Harry Potter getting like sorted into the houses.
No magic hat though that tells you Gryffindor. Or...
Yeah, exactly. So I went through that, and so I matched back out here at home at USC. So now we're go Trojans.
Wait a minute. That's a trail right there.
Yeah, I forget what
Go
we're
Trojans.
called, like the
Bruins,
Trojans. So now I'm right in the middle. So ended up there. So they have a program that's connected with LA County. So I was working there for my adult psychiatry training. And then after that, you can do fellowship, which is even more training. And so I did I went to Harbor, UCLA, which is also in conjunction with LA County, and did a program for child and adolescent psychiatry.
So you didn't have to do a fellowship, but you chose to do so.
Correct.
So you're an overachiever.
You can put it that way. Yeah,
Above
it
and
just
beyond.
helps you to subspecialize to kind of get.
Get really detailed. Not bad. Now, through your educational experience, because this is the difference is black and white. So we're going to ask you some questions that compares both black and white cultures. How were your classes like? Was it heavily on one side of the spectrum, I guess, or how did that look?
Yeah, so I, of course, was in the Midwest going to school, so demographics were very different, than out here. So the majority of the class that I was in were white male counterparts. There were some kind of minorities sprinkled in, a good representation of female med students as well.
Good.
But definitely in the minority.
The minority, right? Yeah.
So how was that experience working with, or training with white males, majority?
Yeah, so it was very difficult. It was very.
Are you saying we're difficult?
It was difficult. I mean, as a woman of color entering a field that's been dominated by white males for so long, that was very challenging, and the culture is very rigid in a lot of ways. So a term that I kind of came across after my experience was kind of the microaggressions, and it's this kind of build up of kind of this like small t trauma that you kind of unfortunately go through. So definitely it was a challenging experience.
It's not only be a woman, but to be a minority woman too. I'm sure you got both sides of those little microaggressions, especially out in the Midwest. But
Absolutely.
So I did a little research knowing that you was going to be on the show, and I seen that black women represent 3% of the physician population.
Yeah, we're in a very, very small minority, unfortunately.
So how do you feel about that? Like, I think that's huge.
I know it is, and it's very sad that we're here in 2022, and that is the statistic, unfortunately. So, and I think we'll get into it more.
We will,
I think,
definitely.
Well, because I wanted to ask, like, what have you done to help that statistic?
Yeah, so I think that mentorship, sponsorship, all those sorts of processes are really, really important. And so I've done a lot of mentoring kind of on my way up, just trying to kind of reach a hand back and, pull up as many people as I can. But it's definitely a very cutthroat, just really difficult field because it's not just kind of you and kind of your time that you put into studying, and there's just so many different factors that kind of get into it. So but definitely mentorship, and then as you get further along, sponsorship and all of that is really critical to help kind of increase those numbers.
Didn't you serve on some kind of boards to help with the administration roles?
I did, yeah. So you do have the opportunity to serve on the admissions committees, and so I did have the opportunity to do that, which is a place where you can have a voice, and to really advocate for applicants. So you're kind of sitting at the table with the people who are deciding, who are getting into medical school or to residency or to fellowship, and being able to say, hey, I recognize maybe this person doesn't match this person with their MCAT score or whatever else, but let's look at kind of in a more holistic way and maybe give them a chance so we can kind of increase representation.
So with that board, was it majority white people or was it a mix?
So I was able to do it at like the med school level, the residency, and then at the fellowship level. And I think at each level it was very different, and it also kind of depended on the population of the program. So kind of looking at that in Ohio is definitely different than that here in the States within the programs. But definitely the people that are highest up with those kind of final decision sorts of seats at the table, majority are white males, although there are people, there are initiatives to kind of bring in more representation and to diversify the face of medicine.
What do you think some of the challenges are to get more minorities, especially women or people of color, to be part of that or to get into that field? What do you think some of those struggles are?
So I think that, unfortunately for many of us, people of color, we're kind of starting behind. So we don't have that like generational representation that can kind of say, you need to start in like middle school, high school, like doing all these sorts of things so that when you get to this point, you're going to be considered, or to have these networks of, knowing chairs and this and that can kind of pull strings to get you by. Like for me, I'm the first in my family to go off to medical school. My mom did go the psychology route. So she's another doctor in the family. But it's like I didn't have that blueprint that, our, white counterparts oftentimes do, that just kind of generational preparations.
We learned a lot about you in a short amount of time. I just wanted to get like straight into the mental health though. How important is mental health?
It's critical. And for a lot of people, it's really kind of a life and death sort of thing. And so I brought my computer just to kind of share some statistics. And I think a lot of us know that suicide is like the second leading cause of death, And so I think, if you're not paying attention and mindful of your mental health, then we're not kind of whole as individuals. So it's critical to pay attention to that.
So you mentioned suicide, and from what I understand, men have a higher statistic of suicide. Is that true?
Yeah, so if you look, textbook, when you're kind of going through those questions of kind of like who has the highest risk of completing suicide, it's going to be kind of like white single males in their like, I may be misquoting, but like 60 plus age range, typically with a firearm. So that's going to be
60 plus
age. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
So that's going to be kind of the population that has the highest completion of suicide, which is an important kind of distinctive or factor of distinction,
right.
And
a lot of
kind
people think about it or attempts, but then actually
right.
successful
completing
at it.
Yeah, that's going to be the highest.
So why is that, you think?
So there are mixed reasons about that I think can get a little bit controversial, because we're also looking at kind of like guns and kind of all of that, which I know was covered on a previous episode for you all. But I don't know for sure kind of like what the literature says as far as like this is why, that this is the highest. But there's a lot of, it's multifactorial, because you're thinking about culture and stigma and all of that.
So based on your patient population, can you see why white males are, a higher risk factor?
So it's a hard question to answer. To say that I can kind of see that in the patients that I work with, especially because the majority of my patients are younger that I'm working with. But when I was seeing kind of like a fuller age spectrum, I think that there's like, if you're looking at kind of like military, for example, and kind of like the, our
PTSD.
veterans, like PTSD, kind of like whether or not people are having success in treatment, having access to means, and with firearms being kind of that primary mechanism. So yeah, because of that, I could see why, that's probably kind of like one of the highest populations it's completing.
And you said access of treatment. Is there, do you think minorities have less access to mental health treatment than the white population?
Absolutely, yeah, and there's statistics to back that for sure. The resource that I find to be really helpful is an organization called NAMI. So they're the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and so they have a lot of great like statistics and kind of like visuals and things like that, resources for families if you have, a family member who's struggling with mental illness, and all of that. And so they have this section that's really great where they do break it down by kind of culture and kind of the statistics. And so there's one which is, so this is a little bit dated, but 2018, that 11.5% of Black adults in the U.S. had no form of health insurance, period. And so that's going to limit your access to mental health compared to kind of the white counterparts.
Yeah, I looked up this research too. It's like I forget the numbers that I looked up, but it was not even the access, but they also don't trust or they don't go to those as well. So there's a lot behind that. We can get into like the whole medical field, not just therapy or not just mental health, where there's a distrust of the system, especially after Tuskegee, and a lot of other things. It's just it brings up a fear of the medical system, and the medical system not trusting, pain tolerance. My son's mom is a nurse, and so she works at Martin Luther King in Compton, and they have all these trainings on like how to work with Black patients because they don't trust the system, or how do you get them to follow the medical practice or the prescriptions and all that stuff. So yeah, it's interesting that there's not that trust, and then there's also there's not that trust on both sides. So how do you deal with that? How do you get the Black community to be able to trust and go to mental health facilities or therapists or like that?
So I think representation has a huge part. I'm not a physician, but I definitely think we need more representation. I think I would feel more comfortable with somebody who know or can relate to me.
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying? So
100%.
Yeah, and there's definitely like literature backing that sentiment as well, that just that there is a higher degree of trust and comfort if you're receiving care from a physician that looks like you. And this is across the board. So is someone speaking in your native tongue? Is someone kind of tuned into different like cultural nuances, like eye contact and bowing and all these different things, that between cultures don't always translate. So absolutely, that's a huge factor. And one of the kind of main things that's fueling this drive to kind of increase diversity within medicine.
That definitely would help, because there's a lot of times where you see, and I don't know if it's almost always white people, but people who don't trust people who speak Spanish or doctors who are not white. They just there's that inclination of just like, oh, well, you can't help me because you speak another language.
I'm kind of guilty of it, but I know better.
But you
don't
trust white doctors?
No. But when somebody speaks another language, you kind of feel like they're dumb. Like...
Oh, like English is their second language, you mean?
No, like if somebody's speaking Spanish and they don't not speaking English, you kind of feel like they don't know. I don't know. You have this kind of...
I know you don't trust them as much, but then you really have to understand, like, that's their native language. Like, do you speak Spanish? No. So if you went to Spain, they'd think you're dumb.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So it's So there's that.
But I know better.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? But that's like in your mind, why the fuck I'm talking to this person?
That's like a huge point, because that's the danger of these like implicit biases, right? Because we make these assumptions based off of experiences and knowledge that we don't have, know? So it's like, if you don't understand what they're saying, you're going to make this assumption. But the same thing, vice versa. They don't understand what you're saying, and they may make assumptions about you. And so that's why we have to like stop and check ourselves and not act from those like implicit bias places.
No, for sure. Like I definitely know better, but like it definitely comes to mind. Like like for sure.
We all do it, and it's just important to highlight that, because that's where the danger lies.
So how do you get the diversification within the medical field? Is it that we need to have more scholarships or more government contact, or how does that work? Because you can mentor somebody, but I wonder if the Black community already kind of writes himself off, like, oh, I can't get there. I can't be a lawyer. I can't be in the medical field. Because you can see that the schooling in those areas where it's majority minority, if that makes sense, they don't get the funding. There's some schools, like LeBron James has his school, which like they're doing those things. Or I think a couple schools actually, where they're focusing on the science and the math and getting these kids to actually, no, if you want to get ahead, this is how you do it.
Right. Yeah. And it's crazy, but it does start, like
super early
kindergarten, like having these like STEM programs in communities of color, so that first the interest is sparked first, and so it's like, okay, now we have the interest, now kind of what can we do to support you, so you can then build the knowledge and the skills to then enter a college, and, study these different kind of rigorous science or whatever field you want to, but then to be able to have those skills and the numbers, because it comes down to the numbers, right? And then the other piece is standardized testing. That's another area where we just kind of start off behind, and kind of the biases and all of this that are kind of built into standardized testing, not necessarily intentionally, but that's another space, is kind of like, what can we do for our young students so that we're able to kind of vie and compete when it comes down to just purely numbers. So
it's not that we're not smart enough. I know that. So like, what is it that, you know, Black people are not getting in these schools? Like, what is it you think?
I think it's access, you know. So if you're looking at kind of the quality of the education that's provided within communities that are majority of color is what's needed to be able to excel and go to the next level, provided or not. And most often it isn't.
Like, I went to high school in the inner city, and I definitely don't think I was prepared enough for the next level. Right. Like, I don't think they provided the tools. I don't think we had the right classes. Granted, people did go to college and stuff from my high school, like college application, like helping with college applications and things like that. Like, my mom and dad didn't know anything about that.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So, like, I definitely think these inner cities need to do better.
Right.
But another thing is, like, we shouldn't have to move our kids out of the inner cities to go to, you know, white schools.
Yeah, or private schools. Yeah. Like, public schools should be good. They should be fully funded. They should have have access to everything that every other white school has. I went to public school in La Cañada, so like I think we had a really great program. Most of our people went to UCLA or USC or Stanford. You know, they went to these great universities, and it's weird to compare because I have no experience with the inner city schools. So I don't even know what they're really missing. So it's educational for me to figure, okay, how do we solve this? Because the more educated and the more successful people we have, the less issues we have, the less gang violence we have. And that's my whole thing is that I think everything should be funded from birth to at least starting high school should be, after school programs should be free. All these programs, because when you're a single parent or even, you know, two parents who are both working, you don't have time to really help your kids out in that first five, the Cal 5 that they are the first 5 years of your little person's life. Those are huge years, and I think a lot of times people are neglected.
So why is mental health important?
Why is it important? Yeah, so I think that it's important because, you know, you have to look at kind of what components of us drive us as human beings, and that's one of like the cardinal pieces. So we're so kind of focused in on our physical health, right, and image and all of this kind of based on the media and social media and all these sorts of things that oftentimes we're neglecting or harming our mental health, which is critical, you know, to being able to interpersonally relate well with people, to being able to kind of enter the workspace and have like positive work relationships, you know, and then that ties into kind of our spiritual health, our emotional intelligence, like all these sorts of things, you know, are critical for us to be successful human beings. And again, you know, the mental health piece is so dangerous because it can really creep up on you and people aren't necessarily aware of the ways in which things are interrelated. So like just an example, like when you're depressed, it's not that you're just like sad and you're crying, like your sleep is thrown off. You know, oftentimes people have insomnia. Your appetite is impacted, weight loss or weight gain if you're eating kind of excessively. You know, you're isolating, so you're not having that social interaction. So it's like, and all these pieces are within the mental health realm, and so it's really critical to be healthy in that regard.
So which mental health diagnoses usually go untreated or like unrecognized?
So I think that I'm not like if I don't know like the number to cite or whatever is kind of like the top one. And I think it also varies by culture because of stigma as well. So that kind of drives that. I'll say, you know, bipolar disorder is a particular diagnosis that's really difficult to treat because people feel really good when they're in their manic space. And so it's really hard to keep them compliant with medication when they're in that kind of euphoric, like, you know, sort of space. And it's very dangerous because they can crash really hard, really fast, and then suicide completion can happen, you know. But definitely a lot of people live with like mild to moderate depression, anxiety that's going undiagnosed and untreated. They're told by family, just suck it up. Like, I had it, you can deal with it. It's like this weakness to kind of seek out support. And so people may have clinical levels of these certain types of diagnoses and just go without support and treatment.
Do you feel like that's emphasized in a certain community? And what I'm getting is that kind of more in the Black community where it's the suck it up attitude, or is there statistics to prove that, or is it?
Yeah,
it's universal. I mean, mental health is universal and everybody needs it.
Right.
But
right.
Are there certain groups that are not getting it or not feel supported, that they aren't manly enough or womanly? It's not a strong character when you admit that, I have a mental problem, so I need to talk to somebody.
Right. Yeah. So the Black community is definitely notorious for it. There's a lot that happens behind closed doors, and you're not supposed to go out into the world and talk about these certain things, things that you're struggling with. You've got the aunt that talks to herself at the family, you're not supposed to talk about it, just it is what it is. And I know this is the difference, it's black and white podcast, but definitely within other cultures as well. It's huge, so if you're looking at the Asian culture, for example, there's kind of a pride factor in this kind of, we don't talk about, these certain things outside of our home.
The stats I saw, they're smallest group that actually use mental health services, right?
The smallest, and then we've got within the Hispanic culture, there's that machismo culture and kind of the strength and the male versus woman and kind of those gender roles in the families and in the homes. And so definitely within different kind of more minority cultures, there's all these pieces that factor into stigma.
And I feel like it's compounded with social media. And that's a whole nother monster right there. But I feel like social media, you have to live up to what you're supposed to be, or what social media dictates what you're supposed to be. And I feel like that definitely compounds. And there is a movement where people are kind of saying no, mental health is great. You need to go do it.
Right.
But the image you're supposed to project is definitely a lot of pressure.
There's a lot of pressure. And it's really, really horrible for our adolescents.
Yeah.
And it's literally killing kids, social media. You know?
Thank God we didn't have social media when we were growing up.
No, for sure.
Nightmare.
Some mental illness is hereditary, correct?
Yeah.
So is there anything that outside elements or anything that can create mental illness? I'm just thinking maybe someone gets raped or something and then they go crazy.
Traumas.
It's not the correct term, but they end up crazy after being raped or molested or something.
They're not crazy by any means, but absolutely.
Bree's gonna learn the correct words.
I know it's not politically correct.
Yes.
People out there call them crazy. You know what I'm saying? So I got to be relatable.
So definitely, yes, there's environment, it's nurture versus nature sort of debate, right? And so there's definitely a lot of environmental factors that can lead to or that can exacerbate mental illness. So trauma is a huge piece, and when that's going untreated, there's a lot of ways that people can really struggle and end up in really, dire circumstances. Substance abuse and kind of dual diagnoses. So when people are, exposed to marijuana, that developing adolescent brain, experiencing psychosis, is that ever going to be reversed? Or are they going to develop into having a schizophrenia that may or may not have developed, depending on if they were exposed to marijuana?
I was thinking about that coming into this because a lot of people that I know that smoke marijuana, that's heavy marijuana smokers, they are usually conspiracy theorists. They have this different way of
mentality.
Thinking. So is that part of it? The marijuana, does it cause certain things? Is marijuana safe?
Yeah, so marijuana, and that's a big topic, absolutely. And marijuana is a psychoactive substance. And so, yes, it can cause psychotic symptom. So that's when you're having like auditory hallucinations. You're hearing things other people cannot hear. You're seeing things other people cannot see.
Right.
Paranoia. You're concerned, okay, someone might be out to get me. Someone's following me. Someone's like communicating with me through, social media or whatever else. And then that like subtle delusional thought content, that's just kind of like, you can kind of debate, but it's just a little bit off course, absolutely can be caused by marijuana use because it's acting in these neural pathways, right? And so it can impact the way that we're processing information for sure.
So why do you think they legalize marijuana?
Money.
Money,
Clearly money.
Money.
Yeah, obviously money, but I think, well, speaking from personal experience, I didn't start using until I was way in college. So I'm wondering if is the issue more of the adolescence, or is it just in general it can affect you and as an adult? Because I think as kids, they should stay away from it because their brains are developing. But once you kind of are at that point of development, maybe it's okay. Tell me it's okay. Is it okay?
So again, it's kind of like, are you genetically predisposed to something, right? And then are you introducing this substance that's kind of accelerating or unearthing something that may not have become unearthed had you not been exposed?
Right, yeah.
But absolutely that developing human brain, it's critical to not have exposure to any of these substances because it's going to impact in ways that may not be able to be reversed kind of over time.
Like at what age does mental health starts to develop? Like I know like some adults, they go through their whole life and then they hit a point where just like mental health hits. Like what is that, or like what age is that most common?
Yeah, so it's a big question because it depends on kind of like the disorder. So if we're thinking about like developmental disorders, intellectual disabilities, that sort of thing, like autism, for example, that we're going to see very early, like toddlerhood, you're already seeing evidence and starting to kind of treat behaviorally to kind of set them up for success. For some people, they may go, through adolescence and hit, like early mid-adulthood and then all of a sudden have this like depressive episode, and it's kind of like, was there something more mild that they pushed through earlier in life, or is this kind of their first legitimate depressive episode? So, and so there's something like within the mental health field, the DSM, and so that's where we kind of look to kind of classify different like symptom clusters to be able to kind of call them something to kind of guide treatment. And so different diagnoses, there are kind of like average age ranges for when you will start to see. Although I will say for the majority, you're going to start to see evidence kind of once you're hitting those like adolescent years.
And are we talking about like because there's a scale of obviously you need to see a therapist because you need to work out your feelings and how to deal with your boyfriend breaking up with you or whatever it is, versus you're having like real mental health breakdown where medication is necessary. So is that where are you going? Are you talking about where medication is necessary, or just in general?
Just in general, because some people go through their whole life,
and
then they have an onset,
some kind of breakdown.
20s, what I'm saying? So
I think it definitely is environmentally. I mean, I'm not the doctor, but I think everybody should have somebody to talk to. And usually parents are too busy, or it's like, well, what you want to talk about is your parents. So we actually, my son actually, because of my split with his mom, we actually put him with a family therapist just to like talk about things, to be able to talk about your emotions and be in your feelings, but navigate through them.
Yeah.
And so I feel like that's really beneficial for him because now he can use those for his future relationships.
Right.
But a lot of people don't get that. And we're lucky we're in a place where she has really great health insurance, so it's easy to do. I had great health insurance at one point, but like I had to pay a copay, and then I had to pay for the parking, and it was like, is this worth it? Like, and especially the first couple sessions, it's one of those things where you're explaining your whole life story, and it's like they're like, and then like the hour's over or 50 minutes, and it's like, I didn't get anything out of this. And so
they're assessing.
They're assessing, and they're trying to figure out, and so like it takes a few things to get through. So one, you gotta stick with it, but also like it costs money.
It does.
And that's especially for somebody who doesn't have great health insurance, or they have a higher deductible,
right?
Or their situations they don't have any insurance at all. they just don't get access. So I wish that there was more, and I think there are some that I don't really know of really well, mental health or family therapists that are more accessible. And I think there's a lot of private companies that are kind of now coming up that are making it super easy. You don't have to go to an office now, especially after COVID. I think, can you like obviously recommend that everybody should have a therapist, or is it kind of like until you have an issue, you should have one?
Yeah, so I think that definitely being able to talk through and process things as they're coming up in your life is really important, so that you're not harboring and letting things fester, and then 20 years down the line having this like, you know, mental breakdown, so to speak. So I definitely agree that it's really important for people to just have someone to talk to. And so definitely with mental health, there's like different levels, right? Yeah. So anyone can benefit from just kind of talk therapy. And there's like great, you know, telehealth platforms and all sorts of things. There's apps and things that makes it very accessible and reasonably priced as well for people to be able to engage. And so absolutely. Now, you know, in the private sector, it's really difficult because, you know, when you're kind of going to a higher level of needing kind of like a certain modality of therapy, for example, to address a specific problem. And so things can get very costly very quickly. You know, we definitely do within, you know, LA County, Ventura County is where I'm kind of most familiar. We have systems in place where you can be, you know, you enter like a county mental health system, for example. You're assigned a therapist, you're assigned a case manager. If you need medication services, you're assigned a psychiatrist. And so you do receive access to services. And so, but then there's
paid through the city, so there is access. Okay.
Yes, there is, so that it's at no cost to the family. But then there's barriers to that, you know, like, okay, where are these clinics located?
Right.
Do families have transportation to get to these appointments? Can they get time off of work during the hours that these clinics are operating? You know, what is the quality of services that they're receiving based on their level of impairment? And so there's all these different factors, you know, that
and are those
play.
Medical professionals people of color where they feel like they're relatable and they can actually understand? Because I think that's, again, a big problem where it's, I don't trust you. I don't want to see you because you don't understand what I'm going through. Exactly.
Yeah. It's a huge piece when you don't trust, you know, and then you're not going to engage. And then oftentimes, you know, it's this like really tenuous sort of space because you might get someone to engage for the first time. They're finally doing it, and then they have a negative, you know, experience, and then they're not, you know, they don't ever want to come back. So it's tough.
So two things: is mental health curable, or is it only treatable?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So it depends on what we're talking about, you know. So if we're looking at like psychotic disorders, so if we're looking at like a schizophrenia, you know, schizoaffective disorder, these sorts of things, we can treat to a degree, but there's kind of this level, this kind of like glass ceiling level of impairment that people unfortunately will experience depending on the level of severity of their mental illness. There are things like adjustment disorders, for example. So someone may be in like a car accident. It's a really traumatic experience for them. They develop depressive symptoms. They develop anxiety symptoms. They get treatment very quickly after that experience. Those symptoms resolved. The adjustment disorder is cured and doesn't progress to a major depressive disorder or, you know, a generalized anxiety disorder, although for some that there's that risk that will happen.
So with some of your families that you talk to, is it stressful for the families to have a kid or a husband or somebody, a wife? Is it stressful on the family?
Yeah, it is. And that's the thing that kind of divides like child and adolescent psychiatrists from adult psychiatrists, because when you're working with children and adolescents, you know, in particular, it's the whole family, you know, and oftentimes there's pathology in the parents. And so you're kind of walking this, you know, doing this dance where, you know, it's like you're not treating the parents, but you are supporting them so that they can get
and
services.
Training them,
Exactly, all that parent training. And then absolutely, when you have a family member with a severe mental illness and you're having to navigate, you know, are they living in like a board and care facility, you know, kind of like, are they on, you know, receiving like disability to receive income? Are they able to administer their medications, or are you having to supervise that, or are you having to find a place that can can do that? You know, do they have unsafe behaviors? Are you the target of their unsafe behaviors? Are they aggressive? You know, there's just like all these things. So absolutely, it's the whole family that's impacted.
I was gonna say, just to trigger off of that, like there's some families who've had issues that they've had episodes, and then they call the police, and then I guess is your recommendation, is there somebody else to call? Because obviously there's been problems where the kid ends up getting shot because the police aren't the end all be all. Like they can handle certain situations, but I don't know if you wanted to speak on anything on that, and then we can kind of circle back. But I think it's really important that there needs to be more mental health field officers, if that makes sense,
Right.
as opposed to police tactical officers.
Right, because the training is very different.
Absolutely
kind of
different,
like what a police officer is told when
They
they're
see a threat and they're trained to take
Right.
out the threat,
Right.
which is
Right.
not the situation.
It depends on what the situation is. Sometimes it's like you're in panic mode. All you know is 911. You call 911.
Right.
It's just being able to say those like keywords, like this person has a mental health history or
Right,
something to trigger them to then send out that team.
Yeah.
Which usually a social
I was
worker
gonna say social
will
worker,
come
right?
with the police to assess, and they'll kind of determine, okay, are we putting this person on a 5150, which is an involuntary 72-hour hold, where they're taken into these LPS designated facilities to receive involuntary treatment
Right.
for, it can be, you know, less than or like a lot longer than that, you know.
Yeah.
So just somehow, you know, expressing that. So then, you know, it also depends. So like DMH, the Department of Mental Health, there's like an access line that you can call. So if you have the presence of mind in those moments, you can call that or, you know, to try to trigger just that mental health team to come out and assess. So,
But then again, that's all with funding. So it's like not small little towns are not going to have that. They're going to send their 3 cops that they have for the whole area. And They have to deal with it.
I didn't think about that.
Yeah.
Is jail a good place for rehabilitation, or do you think there's an alternative for people that suffer mental health crisis? Am I wording that right?
And it's like a facility for them specific.
Like, because I don't think everybody deserves jail. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Right.
if you suffer from mental illness, like, how is that helping you?
Yeah.
You know?
Right.
So, like, what would you suggest?
Well, didn't we also used to have mental health facilities fully funded, and then I don't know if it was Reagan or somebody who decided to defund those or take them away.
Right.
Speak on that if you want.
Yeah. So these are big topics of debate. And so I will say, you know, so when I was at USC in particular, we did have a lot of interface with like Twin Towers Correctional Facility and our like inpatient mental health board. And so, no, jail is not the place for someone who is actively mentally ill to be, you know, because oftentimes they don't have the capacity to really understand their actions. And so to have a consequence without treating them and helping them to regain capacity to, you know, understand. And so so there is a field of forensic psychiatry, which was something that was really interesting to me in training. And so you deal a lot with that, you know. And so, for example, you're going into the jails, and so when people have these charges, they're assessing their capacity. Like, can they understand what their lawyer is talking about? Do they understand why they were arrested? Just basic things. Yeah. And so what they then do is if they deem that they lack capacity, then they're funneling them down the mental health route so that they can receive treatment. If they deem that they do have capacity, then they go down kind of the legal route and whatever. Yeah. And then there are also things called mental health courts, which they're using to try to decompress jails, you know, and funneling people who have like petty crime that's associated with untreated mental illness so that they can mandate mental health treatment, substance abuse treatment, all these sorts of things, so they're not, you know, funneled. I will say, you know, something that was really kind of terrifying, kind of, you know, in training and being in a county facility is that, you know, oftentimes when people who are in jail, which not everyone, but there's a really high percentage of people that have something called antisocial personality disorder. And so they become very skilled at saying and doing what they need to so they can get sent to, the mental health ward or whatever and get a break from the general population.
I would play crazy like
I was going to say, well, that's with the white shooters. Like every time it's like, oh, he had a mental breakdown. Right. And they're kind of excused that way. And
yeah,
I mean, to want to shoot up anybody, you do have a mental breakdown, but I still don't think that's where we should be going with that kind of. It's a little too late for that kind of thing.
Yes and no. Yeah, it's kind of so. People. What gets really dangerous is because then you end up having these people who kind of know how to say the right things that are in like a mental health ward that is not, they're not cuffed or like in, cells or whatever. And you have people like me, like I got assaulted when I was an intern by a patient, and it gets really scary because there isn't the capacity to manage those like antisocial tendencies and aggressive behaviors in a mental health ward that is more appropriate for like a jail mental health space. But, absolutely, I think this all just kind of speaks to the importance of prevention, like all these people, these mass shooters, like all the things, that have happened prior to.
Yeah, there's a lot of checklists. That's like, they did that. Well, we didn't do anything about it. Yeah, they did that. They didn't do anything about it.
It's just like unbelievable. Yeah. And then we have these massive tragedies to then, try to clean up.
So you say you got assaulted?
I did. So
can you tell us about that?
Yeah, and unfortunately it happens to like a lot of people that work within the mental health field, especially when you're working with, on these like inpatient wards in the emergency room. Yep. And it's not because of the people who are these like chronic, severely mentally ill. It's this mixing of, people who have these antisocial personalities that are more appropriate for jail, and they've like swallowed something and now they're here on like our mental health ward when the swallow was, something that we call malingering, where there's this intention behind the secondary gain, from their actions. So I just want to make it very clear that this is not kind of necessarily the people who have these chronic mental illnesses that are acting in these aggressive ways. It's actually a more rare occurrence. More often it's like substances. That's probably the number one. We have people coming in on like PCP, methamphetamine, heroin, and they're just very aggressive. And it's like, places are underfunded, they're understaffed. You have the capacity to appropriately run these codes, to kind of manage people in a humane way, but also a safe way so that we're not all, getting attacked and injured. For me, I was like, working on like an inpatient ward, and a patient just got really agitated, and I was entering the ward behind it was like this old school where you had to use keys and like double lock, so someone like ran in. I had to be present on the ward because it was my patient. And so I'm trying to come in and like lock the door. And when all that's happening, she's like coming around the corner. They're trying to get me to run into the nurse's station. It's too late to like exit the ward without her like eloping from the ward. So I just turned and she just like swung at me. Unfortunately, I was like pregnant at the time, but it's like, boom, that was now a trauma, that's occurred. And so for anyone that undergoes trauma, then you do need that support to process and decompress. And to kind of recover from that. Yeah.
Crazy. So how did that make you feel? Like, did you feel supported by your the facility that you was working with, or?
Yeah, so I did and I didn't. It was a really tough time, especially because I was like my first year. So intern year is your first year of residency training. So you've done medical school, you've decided like what you're going to specialize in, and then your intern year is a more kind of general year. So like I had to rotate through like pediatrics and neurology, internal medicine, all these different things. You're working with all kinds of patients, and then you get more kind of specialized as you go through the years of your residency training. So this was my first year, like excited, and boom, this happens. And so I think that, there were conversations to talk about, how it impacted everyone, because I wasn't the only person that got assaulted. But I think in kind of trying to figure out what could have been different, that was where some of the comments started to sting a little bit and made it difficult to kind of process through. But at least they did provide that space to talk through it.
Right. I kind of want to circle this back to the comparisons, I guess, but what are most of the traumas that maybe the Black community see versus the white community? Like where is the focus, I guess, of that? Of
the trauma, yeah. So definitely something that's really, unique, not just to the Black community, but I'll just speak to that for now, which is that we do have this like generational trauma, and this like collective trauma dating back to slavery, right? That we just have in our blood, And so, and it's linked to physical manifestations of that. So we've got high blood pressure, we've got diabetes, we've got chronic heart disease, all these different things.
That's not just from soul food.
It's not, no. that makes it worse, but no, that's not it. But
which is so good, man. I'm sorry.
It is. It's good. We have to, be mindful of how much we consume. Right. So, but yeah, it's like we've got this collective generational trauma that is directly tied, there's literature tying that to these chronic illnesses that we're just predisposed to. So that's one piece, and then we talked about microaggressions, we've got colorism, we've got black hair, can I touch your hair, like all these things. We've got, like, oh, you're so articulate, and oh, you're able to get good, just these little, things that really, it's like a stone in a river, just getting like
and I'm guilty. I'm definitely admit I'm guilty of some of those things too. I mean, I think a lot of the white community, we don't know better. We don't know that we're doing it at the time. Obviously, like touching hair, like don't do that. But it's the little things that just are subconscious at this point. So I think that's the whole reason this podcast is out and we're doing it is because we need to understand these little things. And unfortunately, most of our audience is Black, and then Black and female too. But so we need to get the white people to actually see and understand, like recognize what we're doing, and then try and combat it and try and minimize it or eliminate it, really. So it'll take time, unfortunately, but I think that's our goals that we're trying to get to.
And I think it's amazing. I think it's really important and really fantastic that you guys are doing this, and it's really timely because it's like there's been, so much energy and kind of upheaval with like George Floyd and kind of all these, what we've experienced. And it's like we need to continue to learn from each other and continue to spread this awareness, if we're going to get anywhere, because it's like, it's really, a lot of people, I mean, just this week, people just crying, in sessions talking about how the weight of the world that they're feeling, and carrying on their shoulders. And it's like, what do we do? Like, what are we going to do? And so these things like this are doing something. So I definitely, commend you guys for creating this space because it's so important.
Absolutely. It's definitely very important, and it definitely helps when you have professionals like yourself who can kind of walk us through it, because we can talk about the differences all we want, but like to have the actual person in the field to talk about it is super helpful.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know if we actually like covered, but which race is mental health most prominent in?
Okay, yeah, and I think I pulled.
What do you mean by mental health? Because mental health is like
mental illness.
Illness, okay. Because you see mental health, and I'm like, yeah.
I was staring at your shirt, so mental health.
I know.
Yeah, so it's funny. I was just looking at those numbers. So again, just to kind of cite my reference, I'm looking at NAMI. Like if you're interested, NAMI.org, NAMI.org, and they have a lot of just user-friendly like statistics, resources, all sorts of things. So I am looking at the annual prevalence of mental illness among U.S. adults by demographic group. And this is, I believe, 2020 data. So the highest is going to be non-Hispanic, mixed, multiracial, or I'm sorry, So let me tell you what they break it down by, and then I'll tell you which ones are the highest. So they've got like non-Hispanic Asian, non-Hispanic white, non-Hispanic Black or African American, non-Hispanic American Indian or Alaska Native. They've got non-Hispanic mixed, multiracial, non-Hispanic Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander. Then they have Hispanic or Latino, and then the LGBTQ community. And so that community has the highest prevalence at 47.4%.
LGBT. Wow.
Following,
That's interesting.
Yeah, to follow is going to be non-Hispanic mixed or multiracial, which is also pretty interesting if you think, because that is climbing, as kind of like interracial relationships and all of that is on the rise. And so that's at 35.8%. Following that is non-Hispanic white at 22.6%. And then following that is going to be, it's close between non-Hispanic American Indian or Alaska Native is 18.7, and then Hispanic or Latino 18.4. So those are the top when we're looking at prevalence.
And you reminded me, because I was going to ask about this. So the
LG.
I'm sorry.
Lesbian, gay, bisexual,
Okay.
transgender.
Yeah. Sorry, I don't know how to say it. But is being gay or transgender, is that a mental illness?
That's a great question. I was going to ask that too. Because
that's a great question.
What is that in the mental field? Because there's a lot of conservatives who say like, oh, you're just mentally deranged from what's normal. So what is that considered?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And this is a really like controversial space to enter. So
Absolutely.
because when you're looking at the DSM, right, which is like that diagnostic manual that everyone in mental health is using, again, you're looking at symptom clusters to classify these different like labels. And so, there's different schools of thought. Some people are like, oh, we shouldn't be boxing people in. For other people are like, no, this is absolutely necessary, so we can kind of standardize things. So the DSM is on 5TR, just came out this year. I don't know if they changed this from like the DSM-5 to this like new one that just came out, but there is something called gender dysphoric disorder or gender dysphoria. So it's as if be identifying within kind of these different boxes, and within the LGBTQ community is fitting under kind of like a diagnosis. The idea is that it's more kind of this, is dissonance the right word, between kind of your, what people see you as and then kind of what you internally feel that you are. So that struggle, I think, is what the goal is to kind of label, rather than because you're identifying as this, you are mentally ill. But it just the fact that it's in that huge manual and has been for so long is very hurtful, for that community. So, but definitely, for people who are identifying within that community, most often their chart will have that particular diagnosis in there.
Because it's
as a disorder,
chemical imbalance, right?
So it is not necessarily a chemical imbalance, no. So it depends on like what we're talking about, So for example, if you are identifying as like lesbian, so you're biologically female and you are attracted sexually to other biological females, that's not like any sort of like chemical imbalance per se, If you're looking more kind of in like the transgender space, and I apologize if I'm misspeaking because I'm definitely not like an expert by any means in any of this, but from my understanding, kind of if you're looking at more of the transgender space, so there's some theories of kind of like the male mind versus the female mind, and whether that's in a male body or a female body. And so if you're born with like a male brain in a female body, then that a chemical imbalance. I don't know that I'd call it that, but there is this kind of where you then would enter kind of the transgender space, because the brain that's in your body is not matching. And so you go to...
So I notice that you're being very careful with your wording.
Yeah.
She has a career to worry about.
Yes. So is that difficult when, and I don't necessarily know your full beliefs, but is that difficult when like that's not your belief, or or some of the physicians that's treating these patients, is that like difficult? Like people, she's a girl and she wants to be called a him, or the pronouns. Like is that difficult, do you think?
So that's where I think it's important to think about kind of the core of who you are as a person and whether you're true to the field that you're working in, So if you are, authentic and abiding by, these oaths that we take to be physicians, then that should not be difficult, to do that, because you're not supposed to view people through your personal lenses, So if you're this like hardcore Christian who thinks the Bible says this and that, and this is wrong and this is right, you're not supposed to be looking through that lens when you're working with your patients, but that's where this like lack of trust comes in, right? Because then who knows what people are saying like when they go home and they're behind closed doors, and kind of the body language that they're emulating when they're in the room, and whether that comfort or lack thereof is being translated to the patient, So I mean, I'm definitely an ally with the community. So for me, I'm in full support. I have come across people where it's difficult for them because of their personal beliefs, but that's where we don't see eye to eye, because I don't feel like you should be seeing through your personal lens, when you're working with people.
In the medical field, yeah. There was this really great picture I saw of these Klansmen who were bleeding out or like had some kind of injuries, and there's black doctors all around them, and it's just like, I can't imagine the thought process, but hey, I gotta treat them, but it's reality. Sometimes you deal with people that you don't agree with, and or just not your understanding.
Right, because it's your duty, right?
Yeah.
It's like if you're at the gym and somebody has a heart attack on the treadmill next to you, and you're a doctor, like you act, to the best of your ability. But I mean, you're not going to stop and say like, "Did you vote for Trump?"
Right.
Like,
Right.
So it's like you do what you need to do.
Exactly.
Unless he has a MAGA hat, and then you just
Still gotta do it. Still gotta do it. Just throw it to the side.
Can you imagine doing CPR and he's just right there? So speaking of Trump, are there people, or do you have clients or patients or people that you know of that are in higher positions that suffer from mental illness?
Yeah, absolutely. There are people who are able to achieve a high degree of power despite their substance abuse, despite their mental illnesses, despite their personality disorders, which is another thing that's just so fascinating. So absolutely, there are people, and I mean, if your mental illness isn't impairing, your decision-making capacity, then that's great to be able to kind of surpass that challenge. But when we start to enter that territory where it is, that's where things can get a little bit tricky.
For our viewers out there, like, what would you recommend, or what do you think people should know about mental illness?
It's really important to just kind of collectively let our guard down about mental illness. We all have, and the other piece is kind of like that word illness, or kind of like mental health disorders and all these things, and kind of the language makes it difficult for people to kind of let their guards down. And so we all have a mind, we all have emotions, we all have trauma, we all have feelings, all these things, right? Just as human beings. And so it's really just important to kind of normalize that not every day is going to be easy and perfect. And when we're in those tough spaces, that like our fellow human counterparts, we need support, and we need to have that humility, you know, to kind of humble ourselves to step out and to support, and also to support each other, you know, because sometimes we may not see it and we've got our head in the sand and we're trying to just push through and go. And someone might say like, hey, like, you need a minute, you know, and just pausing and accepting that and taking that in and getting the support that you need, you know, and making sure that the people around you have that as well, and knowing that that's okay.
During 2020, obviously a lot of people had a lot of time to themselves, and isolation was a huge factor. And if you were lucky enough to be with somebody and isolated with somebody, then that kind of helped. But if you didn't have somebody, then it was a really difficult experience, especially for families, not knowing if you're going to see them or when you're going to see them again. So that was a huge deal. Like, how has that affected the community, especially now? Like, we're sort of post-COVID.
Right. Yeah. So, you know, people will argue that kind of to follow, you know, as it's kind of like that wave is starting to crash down, then there's this like mental health wave, you know, that has picked up. And it's like, and it's very real. And those of us that are in mental health are feeling the impact, the volume of people that are for the first time seeking treatment and are in just really bad shape, you know, and in need of help and support and treatment and whatnot. So absolutely the numbers have gone up, the volume, and it's kind of like the system, does it have the infrastructure in place to hold and to provide the support that people need, you know? I think that definitely telehealth has been great, you know, because it has, you know, some people, their anxiety, you know, at least prior to the pandemic, they were able to get to the grocery store and this and that, and they can't do that anymore. Like, they can't get out of the house. They're just debilitated by their anxiety. And so at least we're able to reach them through Zoom and telehealth visits or whatever, you know. But absolutely, it has impacted on a global scale mental health for sure.
So maybe for the younger generation, it'd be a good field to get into, because we need more of those. We need more nurses. We need more mental health providers.
We do. We need a lot more people in mental health, and it's not an easy field. You know, it's a tough field, and but we need more people in it doing the work to just kind of support our fellow, you know, humans.
So I believe I have one more question. You take on the weight of a lot of patients, you know, so what do you do for your mental health?
Yeah, and that's important. You know, it's very important to, you know, maintain and to, you know, support your own mental health. And so I go to like my little workout class at least once a week, you know, where I have that space to just like release. I have the app Headspace, which I think is really phenomenal. If you're looking for like a mindfulness meditation app, it's got like quick little like breathing exercises. And so, you know, if I'm feeling things rising up, I'll just do a little like Headspace thing to just kind of ground myself, which I find to be really important. I'm a big family person, so spending time with our kids, with family, having meals together, cooking together, traveling together, you know, all those sorts of things. Our pets, you know, people have emotional support dogs. We've got our pets in the home that just bring so much joy, you know. So, and I think that especially so, like, I'm a mom, I'm like working full time, like there's a lot going on, you know, and I'll talk to a lot of other moms who are like, I just don't have the time. Like, I can barely, you know, run to the restroom, take a shower, anything. You know, and it's like we have to just like we schedule our kids going to soccer and ballet and that, we have to schedule in time for ourselves. And that's something I've had to learn, you know, because I, for so many years, have just been like, go, and you just like survive and like, you know, but that's not a way to live.
Burnout
you know?
Is definitely a real thing.
It is.
Especially being a parent is, you don't, the only time you have is after they go to sleep, and at that point you're too exhausted to do anything for yourself too.
Yeah, it's true. It's definitely true. So scheduling, even if it's like, okay, when the alarm goes off, I'm gonna do like 3 rounds of box breathing, you know, that's a moment of mindfulness, and that's important. You know, if I'm gonna be in the shower, if you're religious, you're doing prayer work or something, you know, you're meditating, just finding those spaces and those times to take care of yourself.
Extra time in the bathroom. I don't know if that's a man thing, but That's my time to get my mental state back.
I'm in there forever.
Exactly.
But do you think it's important for mental health workers to also talk to therapists or other mental health workers?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So like, and then when you're going in through training to a degree, depending on kind of what area of the field you're in, that's typically built into a degree. So for example, you'll have like supervision where you're talking through like appointments you've had with patients, how it impacted you, you know, are you experiencing because vicarious trauma can happen, you know, someone may talk you through, you know, their narrative of when they were raped, and you can experience like this vicarious trauma, and so being able to process through that is really important. So absolutely, and I think we have to, you know, go by what we're telling people, you know, so if we're experiencing symptoms of depression or anxiety or whatever else, we do need to go out and seek that support, you know, it's critical. So I definitely say that's important.
And before we close, just give us one of the best stories that you've experienced with a patient.
Okay, let me think.
Or most interesting.
Okay, the first one that just came to mind, it just made me smile thinking about it. Which I'll just tell you, that's one great thing about the field of mental health is like the stories, like you just cannot make this stuff up. It's just like amazing. But I was working on an inpatient floor, and so when you're inpatient, that in order to get there, you have to be quite sick, you know. And so there was this woman, she was this like really sweet Hispanic woman. She was in like her like early 60s, and she was brought in on this involuntary hold, and it sounded horrible. So like the people in the field, they write up these holds, you know, like, you know, we have like a 65-year-old Hispanic woman experiencing auditory hallucination or whatever. So on hers, it told this story of how she was like barricading into her home because El Chapo was after her and after her family, and that they were going to kill her family. And so this is being translated as like, you know, delusional thought content, like visual hallucinations, grandiosity, like why would El Chapo be after her, blah, blah, blah. And so she's like, I'm telling the truth, I swear, like, please, you know, this is real. And so one of my co-residents at the time, so it's really important, we're supposed to collect collateral, which is where you go, you call families, you say, you know, we have your family member here, you know, can you tell me about them, blah, 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 just so you're not just going by what's on the hold and what they're telling you, right? Yeah. So he went to collect the collateral, and we're trying all these phone numbers, they're not working. And so long story short, he reached one of her sons or someone. And so he explained that they rented a room in her home, and that this guy, El Chato with a T, was this like gang member in their community. And so they were renting a room, they found out about the gang activity, and so they like kicked them out or evicted them or whatever. And he had this vendetta to come back. He threatened to kill her children and blah, blah, blah. But it was like the difference between a P and a T. You know, she's talking about El Chapo. They were hearing El Chapo thinking like this woman, but El Chato was after her. Was going to kill her. You know, so that was like, and so then it became, okay, you know, safety thing and like whatever. But anyways, that's just like one story that brings a smile to my face. And it underscores, you know, if there's any trainees listening, the importance of collecting collateral, because had he not reached this family member, she would have been who knows how long, you know, and on all kinds of medications, you know, but it's like, no, she was telling us the truth.
There's a lot to unfold with mental health. So we can't do it all, because we would be here for hours, and we don't have that capacity. But thank you so much for being here. I know there's a lot of people who can use this and benefit from it, and understand that we all need to talk about our feelings and flush things out. Mental health is super important, so mental health matters, as you can tell. So check yourself, make sure you're feeling good. Check in with your friends. Like that's probably the biggest thing you can do, especially after the pandemic, is just family and friends. Check in with them often.
Are you open to people following you?
And I should listen to my husband, who said I should create this like page, which I haven't done yet, but people can definitely follow me, and then I will transition to a more like public mental health related
we can definitely help you with some videos.
I definitely think you should do that for sure.
Mm-hmm.
All right, guys, we want to thank Dr. Hawkins for joining us today. She was very, very helpful in helping us break down the mental health with both the black and white experience with that. And we're going to put some resources down in the description so you guys can check those out. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next episode.
What's the difference between me and you, 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 me and you? What's the difference between